Good morning. It's Scott McArthur here, and welcome to Artifact Live, where we explore the art and science of storytelling. If you've watched me before, you'll have heard, certainly in the last couple of weeks, that I'm in the midst of homeschooling, like a lot of other people at the moment. And what a night! I was up till 3 o'clock this morning, absolutely knackered. So I'm slightly dishevelled. You'll also have noticed that I hadn't changed the titles to the title of this week's show. We're not talking about comedy this week. We're actually talking about self-identity. I just didn't have time. Welcome to 2021, folks. So this week, I'm going to be talking as slowly as I can because I'm, when you get to that stage when you've had so little sleep that your body starts to try and compensate and it fires all sorts of hormones. That's where I'm at, so I might get a bit wittery. So I'm not sure that's a true word, but forgive me if I do, because gosh, I'm extremely tired this morning. There was a moment, when I thought, should I postpone it? Would people mind? Well, people wouldn't mind, but I would mind. So anyway, so here I am. So another couple of things that happened this last couple of weeks, which is quite interesting, particularly in the context of 2021. I was doing a lunch and learn thing on Friday, and I've started to do those live. Not I don't intend to continue to do them live, but there's been things popping up that I thought I'd do live, and I'm halfway through my chat last week with everybody. And one of my viewers said, "Scott, we can't hear you very well." And it turns out this thing here, let's see if I can. This is my microphone. It's called a Blue Snowball, and it turns out that what happens with these things after a bit of time. Now, somebody said you must do a tutorial video on it. I might. Everybody seems to be doing tutorial videos at the moment. But it turns out that the software doesn't upgrade properly. So you've got to take it off your machine and reinstall it. So hopefully you can hear me. If there's someone there, I can see you're there. But if you let me know you're there, that would be terrific. And that you can hear me, that would be really good, because you do worry about these things when you're setting up to do a live broadcast. And it's amazing how important the lesson I had this morning. I mean, I set up this morning literally in half an hour. Usually take 2 hours, and this is now my studio, and it's all set up, so I can literally walk in, switch it on, do the check, lights, camera, action, boom. I tell you what, it proved its worth this morning. So if you are doing broadcasting, I really recommend that you set yourself up with a little studio so you can just walk in and start broadcasting. So anyway, so that's the trials and tribulations of Scott McArthur this morning. So I'm glad I've got my water with me. It'll keep me going. So today, we're going to be looking at self-identity and storytelling. Now, I decided to do this, and I'm doing this on my own. As you know, I've been bringing guests in most weeks, and I've got a guest next week, but I thought I'd do this on my own because it's about self-identity. I thought, well, it's about me. It's about self. I don't mean it's about me. I'm not going to be talking about me all morning, don't worry. But so I thought I'd do it myself, and we'd have a look at why it's becoming increasingly important. Now, one of the platforms that I think most of us use these days, certainly professional people use these days, is LinkedIn. And about 3 or 4 years ago, LinkedIn was the place. You went there, and it was where your digital CV was, or your resume for the American viewers, and it was pretty important. And LinkedIn has continued to grow. It's snaffled up other platforms. It's pretty dominant in the market. And in fact, some of you are watching me right now on LinkedIn. Hi. And I'm now starting to wonder about it, because it's been like a creeping, I don't know what the word would be, unhappiness or uncomfortableness about LinkedIn recently, because I've noticed that they're starting to play, they've always played the algorithm game. In other words, there's all these gurus on LinkedIn that tell you how to play the system, whether your video is less than 60 seconds long, or you're using the right hashtags, or you're whatever. And this is a type of territory that's starting to worry me about the self, because this week, I noticed something a bit different on LinkedIn, in that I was getting a lot more ads, And I mean, nonsense. There is no intellect in that algorithm, because I was getting all these ads for platforms, IT platforms, and I'm like, well, there's only two of us in our business. We're not going to be buying an IT platform, and it was starting to get on my nerves. And then I noticed I was getting all these. Oh, I got two. Congratulations, your post is currently trending in the top 1% of the LinkedIn engagement posts. It's absolute nonsense. And clearly what they're doing is trying to pull you in and to get you to spend more time on LinkedIn, to spend more time on their platform, and maybe to get you to spend some money on all these adverts they seem to be using. So I'm getting a little bit uncomfortable with it. And I don't know how you feel. If you are on it, let me know how you feel about it. But it seems to me, and this is quite probably quite controversial, don't care, that the people who are successful at the moment on LinkedIn, predominantly, not all of them, are people who teach you how to be successful on LinkedIn. Bit of a problem with that. It seems to be growing arms and legs, and I'm slightly uncomfortable with it. And this is Tristram Harris's area, where he talks about ethical social media and how we are being sucked in by the algorithms to continue the scrolling process. And then they're telling you how well you're doing. It's a bit like being a child again back at the nursery, isn't it? They give you a gold star and you feel like, oh, that's great. I feel really good. And you continue to do whatever they ask you to do. And I just worry, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe all that hokum. But I do worry that that LinkedIn and other platforms are starting to gobble up my time a bit more than they deserve to have of my time. Because one of the things that, if you've seen me with my egg timer, using my egg timer before, I'm quite keen on people thinking about time and making sure that what they do is time well spent. And I'm starting to think that me spending so much time on certainly platforms like LinkedIn isn't time well spent. And I know some of y'all go, oh, no shit, Sherlock, we've known that for a long time. But I worry that I've spent too much time on these platforms, and I'm going to have to spend less, or I'm going to have to review how I do it, because I am getting a bit sick of them treating me like a child and sucking me in with all these badges and gamification, they call it. And it is getting existentially, it's starting to worry me. So watch this space, LinkedIn. I think you might be seeing a lot less of me over the next few months. So today's show, well, I was wondering about how I could help you with this and how we could start to think about self-identity through story a little bit differently. And it won't surprise you, I'm going to tell a story. I've got a couple of other people that I'd like you to listen to for a few seconds that are going to tell you stories. But this is something that increasingly I believe is important. The question you get, when you walk into a room and you don't know anybody and someone walks up to you, what's the first question they ask you? They usually say, hi, what's your name, if you're lucky. But then they nearly always say, and what do you do? And it's this sort of labeling thing. We need to know where people's social status is, what they do for a living, etc. And I've always struggled with that. Maybe it's because I've never known what I did. But I've always struggled with that question slightly. And I've always struggled with the idea of, in the entrepreneurial world, people always say to me, you need to find your niche. You need to find what you are good at. And I've always thought, well, I'm not sure about that. And so I'm going to focus on that today. And I'm going to start by going back to someone who I almost feel like is an old friend of the show, and that is the poet David Whyte. And I've played a couple of times his poem, and I know it's resonated. His poem, Start Close In, and people have enjoyed it. So I'm not going to play that one again. I'm going to play you another one. And this is one about a lake, and it's where he explores how it feels sometimes to get in that, from the sort of the Celtic tradition, the liminal space between heaven and earth. And I don't believe in heaven, but I do believe in these thin places, these places that that feel different, that you sit there and you go, oh, wow, what's going on here? And it makes you think. So I think starting with something that helps you think is a pretty good place. So I'm going to play this little point. It's less than a minute long. I've got a little, it's a little video of this poem by David White.
In this high place, it is as simple as this. Leave everything you know behind. Step toward the cold surface, say the old prayer of rough love, and open both arms. Those who come with empty hands will stare into the lake astonished. There, in the cold light, reflecting pure snow, the true shape of your own face.
Now that piece there, when he said the true shape of your own face, I think certainly in my current decade of life, I'll give you a clue. I was born in the worst year possible for a Scotsman who likes football. I've spent a lot of time thinking about my true face, you know, because I used to always identify with my job. You know, I'm a scientist. I'm a business professional. I'm a business consultant. I'm a professional speaker. And then when you think about that, it becomes increasingly daft. You know, you're not going to go to the grave and say, I wish I'd spent more time at insert name of company, unless you're really weird. So you start to think about it, and that links to something that is very contemporary, that I think companies have to think about, and indeed much more important than that, people have to think about. And it's the idea, or rather the notion of ritual, and it's specifically about rites of passage, because when we go into companies or into periods in our life, we go through these natural rites, or at least we used to. You know, the classic, one of my favorite stories, and it's not a long story, but it was of an Indian tribe where they used to live in you know, one of these mountainous parts of America, and there was all these, you know, these tall stacks that they have in Monument Valley, etc. And one of these tribes, and I can't pronounce the name of it, sorry if you're from American descent, because I can't pronounce the name of it, but one of these tribes had this incredible rite of passage, and it tended to be the young men that went through this. And that was where they had to leap between two of these rock structures, and they had to do it with some paint. It wasn't paint, it would be a soil or a clay on their hand, and they would leap across. They would reach up into the structure, into the mountain. Their hand would touch against the wall, and then they would fall back on about 20 feet onto some ground. And that rite of passage was to put your hand, your mark, on the cliff face, on the wall, if you like, in contemporary language. And I'm really drawn to that idea of, you know, what's your mark going to be? You know, what's your handprint on the cliff face going to be? And that type of rite of passage used to be prevalent in Western cultures, indeed in my own culture, in Scottish culture, it was prevalent, and I'll come back to that, and I promise I will come back to that. But it's prevalent in every culture. You go back far enough, in most cultures, certainly original cultures, there are these rites, and indeed even in the sort of the American and other similar sort of new cultures, they develop their own rites. University, you know, the stuff they go through at university, etc. There are all these rites, and I wonder, you know, companies used to do things like induction, where they would spend maybe, they would spend maybe 6 months recruiting you, taking you through all these battery of interviews and battery of tests and all that stuff. And then they recruit you and bring you in, and they go, right, forget all of that. this is how it works around here. And it was a rite of passage into the organization, but even when I worked in HR, I always felt slightly uncomfortable with it, because it was like, we've just recruited somebody from one of the competition who's really clever and really bright, and we're telling them basically to forget everything that they brought with them, and this is how it works around here. It never seemed quite right to me. Now, I know I'm being slightly general in that statement, but it never quite sat with me. But now we are in an environment which probably for the next few foreseeable years, there is going to be differences in how we recruit people, how we initially meet people, and one of the things is we're going to be online a lot more. And I worry that, and I've seen a couple of companies doing it, some very well-known companies doing it, where they're just trying to continue their induction program using this stuff, but just basically the same as they had before. I'd like us to think a little bit differently about that. I would like to think that story could help us see what a person's really like in a slightly different way. Because remember, one of the overarching principles of this show is the fact that, empathy is one of the key outcomes that comes from stories, and that in fact stories act as an empathy engine. And I think that's really important. And that's an appropriate point for me just to pause and to remind you what this show is all about. This is ARTEFACTLive, and this is a show about storytelling where I really try my best to inspire the human and human resources. I really want people to be thoughtful having watched this show. I want them to think about themselves, their organizations, and how they conduct their lives. And this whole idea of stories being an empathy engine I think it's really, really powerful. Now, the chap Riddell who came up with that idea was the Children's Poet Laureate here in the UK. I send you a thank you, sir, because that idea of an engine, creating something, keeping it going, is really important to me. So if you'd like to join me with that, I've just set up a Facebook group called the Empathy Engine, and the details are on the screen. I'd never done a Facebook group before, and I know there's an irony, isn't there? I started the show off by saying I'm feeling slightly uncomfortable about social media gobbling up all my time, and I'm saying to you, come and join me in a social media platform. Yeah. But I'm being quite careful in there. I'm trying to encourage the group. There's only 42 of us, I think, or 41 of us at the moment. I'm trying to encourage people to, interact, tell their own stories, shape their own stories, and also see how I go about being a professional storyteller. And I'm going to share warts and all with you in there. And I've done some of that already. And in fact, this week, I've got a talk on Thursday. And this afternoon, I'll be starting to stream into that group exclusively, just showing you all the nonsense that goes on behind the scenes, because I think learning about how we create empathy is really important, and that story can really help. So sorry to break off, but I think it's important to remind you what we're doing here and why I'm doing it, because I do think it can change the world. So it's quite important. So that's the empathy engine. But let me come back to where we were, and we're talking about induction. I think there are lessons in some stories that I've experienced, or some experiences I've had in this space. And I'm going to tell you a story now about one of those. My first proper job, and my first job was in a kilt maker in Edinburgh. I used to work with this tyrannical woman called Mrs. Mac, who was one of those ladies who had the purple hair, and she used to dress beautifully, I have to say, in a tartan dress that was more like a ball gown every day. And but she ran that kilt shop with a rod of iron. She was terrifying. Yes, Mrs. Mac. No, Mrs. Mac. I never knew her first name. To this day, I still don't know her first name. Anyway, that was my first job. But my second job, if you like, my proper job, was when I left uni, and I ended up being a research scientist. And there's a story behind that as well, which I will tell another time. But I walked into this environment. It was Edinburgh University's pathology department. Now, pathology there is an academic aspect of it. But there's also a diagnostic aspect of it. And I entered the university under the auspices of a grant from the Arthritis and Rheumatism Council. So basically, people shaking tins paid for my salary for what it was worth. It wasn't a lot of money. It was, if I remember rightly, I think it was £6,400. That was my first salary. And I was working, as I've said before, with Professor Dougal Gardner and a couple of other people in the laboratory, a terrific technician called Bob. Not sure if Bob's still with us, but hi, Bob, if you're there. And we were working on bone, cartilage, arthritis, obviously, and a little bit of brain work, believe it or not. But one of the things that I had no idea about when I went in there was that the technician community, well, they were really important. They're a bit like, I think the technicians are a bit as nurses are to medicine. You know, they are, if you like, the foundation of everything that goes on in these research environments, and particularly in pathology, because pathology, which is largely the study of disease, often the study of disease in people who have passed. So you have your forensic people in there. You have your people who try to discover why people died in pathology departments. And the technicians are, well, they're artists. They are honestly artists. They are the people who will take tissue from the human body and they will enable you to study it. And that is an absolute talent that I developed minor skills in that area, but this is an absolute talent that the technicians have. And if it wasn't for these technicians doing that work, the medical people couldn't do their work. They couldn't diagnose anything. They couldn't say, oh, that person died of X or Y. And there's a number of skills in there. There's cytology. There's one that I was very close to, which was histology. Now, histology is where you take a piece of tissue and you slice it very, very thinly using what's called a microtome. It's a very sharp knife that enables you to take tiny little slivers, microns thick slivers of tissue from samples taken from human bodies. And it's a real art, because you can't just get a knife and take a slice out of a piece of tissue. You've got to do what they call fix it. So you've got to take all the fats out so that when you cut into it, it doesn't just do that. And that's a real challenge, because particularly, I mean, I remember I did about 50 dissections of human brains. Human brain is a nightmare. It's like trying to work with a mixture of, I don't know, tapioca and gelatin, you know, and when you cut into it, it just falls, it doesn't fall apart, but it's very difficult to work with. So these brilliant technicians over 100 years have worked out how to do it. And that involves taking the fat out, replacing the fat with wax often. So you would take your tissue, you would fix it, which is taking out the fat effectively, and then you would put it into wax. You would let that wax harden, and then you would cut it with your knife, you know, very, very fine. And that's an art. These guys, you should see them working. They're using the knife, and they've usually got a little paintbrush, and they take these ribbons of sections, they call it, in wax off of the piece of tissue, and then they will put it onto a slide and melt it onto the slide. So the slide then has a very fine, very, very fine piece of tissue on it. And then they will do, there's a whole number of processes they can do in terms of different tests. So there are different, there's the classic, which everybody uses, which is called hematoxylin and eosin, which is basically a standard dyeing technique that they use to show what everything inside, all the cells and all the organs inside the piece of tissue start to appear when you use these particular stains, they're called, these particular dyes. And there are different dyes that show different things. So it's very, very sophisticated and takes some talent to be able to do it well. And in my job, I was working with probably the second hardest tissue. The hardest tissue, as I said, was brain. But the second hardest tissue is obviously bone, because how on earth do you cut thin slices of bone? So I became reasonably proficient at that, and it took a long time, and it involves a whole load of different chemicals and stains and things. It became, I think it's an art, and I'm actually very proud of some of the stuff that I did in that space. I'm going to show you a piece in a minute, but one of the things, the rite of passage, if you like, was very interesting. And it used to be in the pathology and the anatomy department. What you did was you would collect bits of bodies and they would have them in their lockers and all sorts of stuff. It was really weird. Anyway, they don't do that anymore, thank goodness. Even back when I did it. Funny enough, some of the technicians had bits of their own bodies in their locker. So if they went and had their their tonsils out. They'd have their tonsils pickled in a bottle. It was gruesome. Anyway, I saw some things in that respect which I probably shouldn't tell you about. But anyway, one of the things was one of the technicians came up to me and he said, "Would you like to go through the technician's rite of passage?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" I was only a youngster, and one of them was this. What did they do with it? Oh, here it's here. So I was given this box, right? I'll put it here so you can see it. It's just a little box. And I was told, this is yours now, and you need to keep hold of this. And what you need to do is you need to spend some time over the next few months gathering tissue from what they call cadavers, dead people, effectively. Well, it was. And you need to try and collect the whole human body. So what you then had to do, now I'll just open this very carefully because it might not surprise you, but this is full of what they call slides. So what you had to do was you had to gather, there's the human body there. There's a little index for you, which I won't go too close because I know some people feel quite squeamish about it. And I'll take one out and I'll show you one of these. I'll just put this down. In fact, I'll take another one out, one that I actually, yeah. So what you had to do was you had to take a piece of each human organ and you had to create these things here, which are called slides. Now, it's difficult to show you this in any great detail, but it's not going into focus either. That's not very helpful. Never mind. And you took these and you it's all dusty. Look at that. That's really weird. And oh God, look at the date on it. This was made by me in 1989. I'm aging myself. So then what you would do, obviously, you could use these little slides in one of these things, a bit more sophisticated than that one, and you could look at the tissue inside. And that was the rite of passage. It was an amazing experience. And when you went through that, at the beginning of it, I was full of nonsense. I was a student and, ex-student. I thought I knew everything, and you find very quickly in the medical environment and in the research environment, you don't know a thing. The doctors don't know anything either. It's such a complex area. But the one that I'm proud, and I've got quite a few of these, they're on the wall, and they're out. And if I'd had time this morning, I would have shown you the mounted version. But this one, now this is quite difficult. Let me just put this here. This one is one of a human, a ball joint from your knee. And this particular one, if you see, it's not a ball. See how there's the bits of it broken here? This poor person had rheumatoid arthritis. That's what rheumatoid arthritis looks like. Now, this was a 6-month induction program. And, it was difficult because each part of the human body requires to be treated differently. You obviously treat it with reverence. It's quite lovely how people take it very, very seriously. But it was hard, and it was really hard. But after you get through that, I suddenly got treated completely differently by the group. Scott's done the induction program, and although it was never going to be my career doing what these brilliant artists did, I'm really proud that I did it. And to this day, I am proud that I did it. And so it's the sort of thing that I thought they did it well, because it wasn't just a sort of, here's a tick list of, how do you fill in your timesheet? How do you, how do you manage your pension? How do you fill in expenses forms? It wasn't that sort of induction. It was a difficult, prolonged experience. And I took a lot from that. And I, to this day, and it's 30 years ago, I take a lot of pride that I got through that. What things have you done that you're proud of like that? This is not trivial, and I think it shouldn't be. And this is the thing that I'd like you to. I'm going to play something that I think is really quite beautiful in a minute. That I think understanding oneself is becoming more and more important, and being able to express it is becoming more and more important, because things happen now like that. The idea of a CV even, or a resume, I would predict is going to go away, because it's just, there's not time anymore. People don't want to read a two-page resume. They want to get underneath the skin of it. And increasingly what we're seeing, of course, is people doing, thanks, someone said that's amazing. I don't know who you are, because unfortunately I don't have my second PC because my son's using it. Actually, on that, I'm going to press pause. If you are watching me on from the Facebook group, let me just see if this will work. If you type in or go to this link, and I'm just going to put it. Let me make sure I don't make a mess of this. Hold on. Let me just do this. What you need to do is get permission from Restream to show your name, and you do that by following that link that I've just put in the chat. I'm not sure if it goes over to the Facebook group. Sorry, I can't do anything about it live at the moment because obviously I'm in the middle of it. But if you click that link, it takes 4 clicks, and your name will start appearing in the chat on what I'm using here called Restream. So, and of course I've lost my train of thought. Yeah. So these longer types of induction programs taught me that you can take it seriously and start to really discover who you are. And whether you are part of that group or that tribe or that whatever, and people are increasingly using video CVs. They're using animated CVs. They're being clever. They're getting artisan. They're trying to do all sorts of things. And as I've often done, as I started the show, I talked about the hand on the wall, the Indian painted hand on the wall of the cliff where the young boys used to jump across this chasm and get their hand on the wall and fall back. I think there's lessons from that, and I go back to cultures often. I love looking at what did we used to do? Is there a lesson in it? And there's one that I'd like to share with you, and I think it's gorgeous. Now it comes from the Maori in New Zealand, and I hadn't heard of it until reasonably recently. And a friend of mine was telling me about her trip to New Zealand, and she'd come across this. And in a weird sort of almost synchronicity, there's a show I listen to every week. There's only about 3 podcasts I listen to every week, and one of them is called Scotland Outdoors. And the reason, well, there's a number of reasons why I listen to it. One is it's in Scotland. So being in exile here in the Cotswolds draws me, like any other expat, back to Scotland every day. And Scotland Outdoors really manages to do that for me. And they had a guest this week. Now I've got her details. I think I've got them on. I've got them on the... Oh, someone's asking me what was the name of the David Whyte poem. Here it is here. Tilcho Lake, Become Who You Are by David Whyte. Sorry, I should have put that up earlier, guys. Sorry, forgive me on that. So this is a lady who happens to be a professor of, well, she's effectively a professor of refugees. She looks at cultural integration across societies, and she had been working in New Zealand, and she was on the show, on the Scotland Outdoors show. And she talked about something called a mihi, and I'd never heard of a mihi, and it's spelled MEHI. And I'd never heard of a mihi, and I know there's probably some consultancy out there that uses this as its key way of integrating people into whatever. But I don't want you to think about it like that. I just want you to have a think about what this could mean for you. This is about self-identity, and but she's done her own mihi. Now I've started to do one as well because I was really drawn by this. So this is more a listening experience than a watching experience, but I'm going to play her mihi, and it's 3 minutes long. I make no apologies for that. Well, let's talk about it when we've played it. So this is Professor Phillips's mihi, and I think it's quite glorious.
I was born in Sheffield, the UK, a product of the new welfare state to teachers. The hills I loved were Carlwark, Higator and Stanage Edge. The rivers flowed through Watercombe Jollydale. In my genealogy, there are no settlers that I can find, nor in my family, just farmers, butchers, weavers, and the legacies of a dislocating modernity in the north of England. Grandma and Grandpa Blackburn took in strangers, the new immigrants brought from the Indian subcontinent to work the mills of Lancashire. And they took in refugees, those escaping from the Prague Spring, and they helped them find an occupation. Grandma and Grandpa Mayram took me to feed chickens, pigs and sheep in my red wellies before feeding the village. I grew up in the cauldron of rage, which was Margaret Thatcher's destruction of the hope in my city as she closed the mines, the steelworks, and the rates of suicide increased in my school. I became a traveller, a Roma woman selling clothes pegs at my door when my mother was carrying me still unborn, said I would. My father taught me the names of the hills, flowers, trees, and birds. My mother taught me to bake and to listen in hard to words. Music made me laugh and learn. A politics took root. I've never been to Soweto, but it shaped the inner landscape of my youthful soul. Languages opened me out. Anthropology and folklore worked, giving structure to my thoughts. Theatre, liturgy, and poetry gave them form. Offenburg, Saint-Porcher, Durham, Biberach, Clermont, Tübingen, Hayingen, Hornberg, Taizé. I married Robert and we took work in Scotland in Glasgow, a city that was home from home. And the hills became Ben Scriel, Brariach, Ben Aglo, and I dangle my feet in the cold waters of Glentilt and swim in Martyrs Bay on the Isle of Iona. The university became my occupation, and its books and teachings changed my life and sent me back out into the world, a vessel for grief, a vulnerable observer, a witness with words, back to learn again the lessons of hospitality of my ancestors. I often choked with shame at what has been done by the Crown through history in my name. Syria, Palestine, Gaza, South Africa, Malawi, Sudan, Ethiopia, Jamaica, Jordan, Egypt, Aboriginal Australia, Indigenous Canada, Zimbabwe, Malaysia, the Gaeltacht, Aotearoa, New Zealand. I once read the Freedom Charter aloud from the Rivonia cell walls, and everywhere, land, stone, and a meshwork of love and anger. With the years and struggles comes the love of silence and solitude. I once crossed Tongariro, climbed Malangi, Skidder and Scarfell Pike. I've worn out my shoes with walking and standing firm. I'm English, Scottish, Halbschwäbin and Bilen. I became poet, gardener, lover, foster mother, bread maker, piper, wool worker, and at times a person who prays. My friend Picky took me to Te Oruera. I listened to the forest there through the bushmen on the ridge. I slept deeply, bright with stars. I think there is now a moko in the corner of my soul. I am Alison.
Wow. Can you imagine doing that in the UK corporate world? Going right back to who you really are. Am I suggesting that? No, I'd like you to imagine it though. But what I would like you to imagine is, could you use that in your life? Because I thought Alison's Mickey was obviously, she's an expert. I mean, she's an anthropologist. She's a student of culture, if you like. But and thank you, Alison. That was glorious. And I've had a chat with Alison on Twitter about it, and she's so enthusiastic about how we can learn from each other's cultures. It's wonderful. But in there, the bits that, if there's any bit of it that stood out for you, let me know in the chat. The parts that jumped for me and immediately made me resonate. There was the first one, I've written it down, the red wellies. A bit like the awful little girl in the film Schindler's List, or in the other equally awful experience of the girl in The Handmaid's Tale. The red, just bang, it really, what does red sound like? It's really, it really gets you. So I like that, and I love the use of colour therefore in her Mickey, and that was one part. The other part that, and I know politics is not something people like to talk about, but I do. Tough. She talked about Thatcher and how Thatcher destroyed large parts of Scotland with ridiculous policies back in the 80s. And that immediately, of course, made me resonate with her. I started to think, empathy, she did that really quickly, just in that little 3-minute piece. And then the final bit that I've written down, just listening to it again, is that she talked about the inner landscape. And again, I don't think we have a lot of opportunities to do what David White talked about in the first piece that I showed you today, when he's talking about, your true face, or to talk about, like what the Indians did in the story that I told you at the beginning about, what is it really like to be me? And I think Alison really did well there in explaining herself to whomever is listening to her. And she says in the interview that it's almost like a step of diplomacy. It's almost like, this is the river I lived by. This is the mountains I lived by. This is the culture that I lived in. This is how I became me. And it was almost like a river, the whole thing, wasn't it? Because she was bringing all these strands. She said, I am English, I am Scottish. Then she would often, other places that I don't know what she's talking about. I am curious though. But she brought all those rivers together. And at the end, she just finished by saying, I am Alison. Brilliant. So what would your Mihi be? I've started to write my own, and what I'll do, if you're a member of the Empathy Engine Facebook, I'm going to put a template in there, and I challenge you to write your own Mihi. Who's it for? Just for you. You can share it if you like, but have a go at it, because we are not given that opportunity. We're not in, you're encouraged to write your curriculum vitae, and it's all about your job and, your career, but that's not you. So I think if I was still, an HR director, I am actually really interested in what's you, the technical stuff. I can train you, I can help you with that. But the actual you, what you are and how I become empathetic with you, how I understand you, is really, really much more important. And one of my other favorite, and I get slightly wary of using almost like car sticker type quotes, but in the film, and that's why I've got my little spaceman here, in the film Interstellar, one of the characters turns out to be one of the baddies. But one of the characters says at one point that empathy only extends to our line of sight. Empathy only extends to our line of sight. That really, boom. When I heard it right away, it resonated with me, because what does that mean? So I thought about it, and I thought, well, let me just, hold on, let me see if anyone else is. Yeah. What does that mean? Well, that means that, you only have any feelings for as far as you can see. So if you read a book, and if say it's an autobiography or a memoir or whatever, you start to develop some understanding of that person, so you develop some empathy for that person and how they got to where they got to. But one of the good things about social media is that our line of sight is now across the world. And indeed it extends to Mars, because you can actually, go to Mars on one of these little robots now and see what the robots are saying. Although they're not humans, you can see what's going on over there. So yeah, sorry, I get dead geeky about this stuff. Anyway, but a line of sight's extending, and I think having a Mihi or something, I'm not saying we should all say, right, I'm going to read you my Mihi. Maybe I am. But I think that really helps people understand who you are. So have a go. See, I'll put a template. I've finished it, but because I was a bit late last night, I wasn't drinking, but because I was a bit late last night, I didn't quite finish it this morning as I'd planned to. But I'll pop it into the Empathy Engine Facebook group, and you can have a go at it. And I'd be delighted if you would try it. I'd be equally delighted if you'd even share it. But just try it. That's the more important thing. So that really is this week's show. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a true storytelling show, hasn't it? I mean, we started off looking at American Indian culture, and I apologize for not being able to pronounce the name of the tribe. I will stick that on the socials in the next few days. We then moved to a wonderful framing of the whole thing by the equally wonderful David White, the Yorkshire Irish poet. And then we took a step aside, and I told you my story about how I'd experienced the most important, or rather one of the most important, powerful rites of passage in my life when I worked in the laboratories. And then we finished by going to another culture, an ancient culture, to see how they self-identify and how they share that and therefore extend empathy from their tribe to other people and across the world. I hope you've enjoyed it. I have, despite the fact that I was rushing around like an idiot this morning trying to get this all going because I hadn't slept. But nevertheless, I've enjoyed it. And I think the idea of self identity and, you know, who am I? You know, what is your real face, from that liminal poem that David White shared with us earlier from the Nepalese lake. Even that sentence is great, isn't it? Because you're immediately taken all over the world just by a couple of stories in a poem. You know, it kind of proves my point, guys, that this stuff is so important. And when you leave today and you go back into your office, or you go back into your homeschooling or whatever, remember to watch out for stories. You know, there's always something happening that's worthy of recording. And as a self-help guru once said, you know, if your life is worth living, it's worth recording. And as you know, I encourage you all, if you've tuned in before anyway, I encourage you all to be an archaeologist of your own life. You know, gather stories, because those stories could change the world. Thanks very much for tuning in. My name is Scott McArthur. Well, my name is Scott McArthur, and that was Artifact Live. Next week, we're going to be looking at how stories can be used to affect social change. So this is the sort of, we're jumping into the serious side of stories, because it's all not about empathy. It is really about changing the world around us. So thanks for tuning in. See you next week.